seen Gaza genocide. We've seen bombing of civilians, forcible transfer, destruction of homes. I'm just looking at the Israeli playbook here. Refugee camp airstrikes, attacks on journalists, shellings of the UN RWA schools, destroying fields, trees, usage of banned white phosphorus, attacks on paramedics. Where are we going with this?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is a standard Israeli practice, put on on a larger stage. Israel has been the illegitimate occupier of Palestine since 1948. We have to go back and acknowledge that the birth of Israel was done at the expense of the Palestinian people. The Nakba, or the catastrophe, the forceful expulsion of 700,000 Palestinians from their homes, the murder of thousands. This is what Israel was born from. I'm not unsympathetic to an Israeli state. I'm not unsympathetic to a Jewish homeland in the Middle East. The history of the Jews is a long and tragic history with, just in the last century, we saw a Holocaust that killed millions of Jews. They were singled out for genocidal murder by Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. And so, and prior to that, there were pogroms in Ukraine, pogroms in Russia. There were, the slaughter of Jews dating back to the First Crusade. So it's not as if the Jewish people felt at home in Europe. And should there be a place for anybody to feel safe in, to feel secure, to raise a family, to be able to practice your religion freely without fear of prosecution? Absolutely. I mean, I call it the United States of America. We're not perfect, but I'm not someone here. You're going to hear me be very critical of Israel today. I'm very critical, but I'm not critical of Jews. I'm not critical of the Jewish faith. How can I be? I'm an American. The whole premise of my country is based on freedom of religion, freedom of expression. This isn't about being anti-Jewish. This is about the way Israel has manifested itself, political Zionism, the weaponization of political Zionism, and the consequences of that. The Palestinian people that exploded in violence, their cause that manifested itself on the October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas, it didn't just happen out of the blue. It's part of a continuing process of frustration, of violence being inflicted on them and by them that manifested itself in this manner. So it's not as though I'm saying, goodbye Israel, but I am saying goodbye political Zionism, because political Zionism is behind this concept of Israeli supremacy. Again, as an American, I take umbrage at anybody, even America. I am very critical of America when we say we are the exceptional nation. I get very mad at politicians when they say, God bless America. I'm like, why? Why does God bless America? We're humans, all of us, made by God, if you believe in religion. And to say God bless America is really what you're saying is God damn the rest of the world. And I don't mean that in a curse word. I just mean the damnation of the rest of the world by God. That's what the implication of this is. So when the Jewish Zionists speak of the need for a Jewish homeland predicated on biblical notions of a greater Israel, where they are exceptional, they are God's chosen people, and everybody else is something other than God's chosen people, I have a problem with that, and so does the rest of the world. Now, I respect people's religious beliefs, but I can't support your religious beliefs if your religious beliefs are built upon the notion of imposing your will on others because you claim to have some sort of God-given superiority. I'm violently against the Banderas in Ukraine. We've had this conversation before, and the Western Ukrainian Banderas believe in the supremacy of the pure Western Ukrainian race. This is why they treat the Russians, the Poles, the Jews as subhumans. This was the foundational notion of Nazi Germany, the supremacy of the Aryan race, the master race, the Übermensch. No, so I can't support an Israel that's predicated on the notion of Jewish exclusivity, especially when the exclusivity comes at, holding the sword in your hand, as David Ben Gurion, the founder of Israel, spoke of, as Moshe Dayan, one of the founders of Israel, talked about, the sword in the hand, holding back the Palestinians whose land they admit they stole. They stole the land. They murdered the Palestinians, and therefore understand that this relationship we're talking about today is of an occupier and an occupied. And this is an important legal predicate, because there's people out there saying that Israel has an inherent right to self-defense. And under normal circumstances, you could articulate a case. You could make a cognizable case that Israel was attacked, therefore they defend. But the occupier never gets to cite self-defense. The occupier never gets to point at a problem that comes from within the zone of the occupied that manifests itself violently on the occupier. They say, we have a right to defend ourselves. No, you don't. You don't have a right to defend yourself. You are in the wrong because you are the occupier. And the United States has been playing, games, political games for years to ignore this aspect of Israel, just like we ignore the fact that Israel is in violation, open violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and our own laws. Because of Israel's nuclear weapons program, our own laws would prohibit us from engaging in the kind of trade and military on military relations. We play silly games where we pretend that's not happening. Deliberate ambiguity about the nuclear weapons. It's not a nuclear weapon until it's introduced. No, it's a nuclear weapon. It's there. In fact, one of the Israeli ministers alluded to a nuclear weapon as a potential solution to the Gaza problem. See where we're going on this one. So this is problematic in the extreme. I don't condone the murder of innocent civilians. But again, let me just remind people out there about a historical precedent. In the lead up to the invasion of Normandy back in 1944, Charles de Gaulle, who was the leader of the Free French, was approached by American, British military planners who said, hey, we're going in hard. It's war. We're coming across the beach. We're hitting them with the airplanes, the whole thing. And we got to bomb some places like the city of Caen. We got to bomb it. And people are going to die. French civilians are going to die. And de Gaulle said, how many? And they said, tens of thousands. He said, that's the price we have to pay for freedom and for liberty. 60,000 French civilians lost their lives in that campaign. 60,000 lost their lives. Now, what price do we put on the freedom of the Palestinian people? Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about an enslaved population, a population, especially in Gaza, that's been put in this open air concentration camp. What price do we put on their freedom? And again, I speak as an American whose nation was born of revolution to liberate ourselves from the tyranny of the tyrant king in England. So, we know that there is a need historically for revolution at times to liberate oneself from oppressive regimes. The Palestinian people are screaming for liberation, screaming for freedom. And so they manifest their desire violently on October 7th in what was a masterful military operation, but you're not allowed to say that. You see, the moment Israel acknowledges that they got beaten a stand-up fight, let me just put it out here, guys. The Battle of Hue City, I'm a Marine, I always cite Marine Corps stuff. The Battle of Hue City was the largest urban battle fought during the Vietnam War. It unfolded over the course of 3 to 4 days, longer if you count some of the follow-up actions. And the Marines lost 200 and some odd Marines killed in that. The bloodiest battle. Israel lost that in 1 day fighting Hamas. Now, if we're going to call the Battle of Hue City a battle between two opposing forces fighting one another, what do we call what happened along the Gaza barrier on October 7th? It was not an act of terrorism. These weren't terrorists that came across the wall. These were soldiers of Islam, soldiers of Hamas, soldiers of the Palestinian people who took the Israeli army on in a stand-up fight and beat them. The Golani Brigade, 2 battalions, the 13th and the 51st, were beat in a stand-up fight. Other units were likewise beat in a stand-up fight. There's a surprise attack. Scott knew it was a morning attack. There was no surprise attack because the Israeli intelligence service was there watching this the whole time. They knew it was coming. The political leadership was asleep, but don't blame Hamas for the leadership failure of Israel. Israel cannot acknowledge that what happened on October 7th was a military action, because to do so, they would have to acknowledge the scope and scale of their collective failure. So it becomes a terrorist action. But if you don't define a problem properly, you can't come up with a solution to the problem. And because Israel chooses to define this as a terrorist action, their solution is bogging down into nothing. This is why, even though we see Israeli troops on the ground in Gaza, understand that controlling the ground above ground means nothing when Hamas has spent years going underground. When they have tens of thousands of fighters 70, 80, 90, 100 meters underground in tunnels and systems that were prepared for this very action to survive 80 to 90 days with the Israelis on top. This is a military operation. This is not terrorism. This is the manifestation of the legitimate desire of the Palestinian people to enjoy the same things we all claim we want to enjoy. And I will put this out there to every freedom-loving person watching this. If you lived in Gaza, you would support Hamas, or you're not a man, you're not a woman, you're not worthy of a family. If you don't support those who are seeking your freedom, seeking to define you collectively as a nation, as a people worthy of the dignity that comes with having a national title attached to you, so that you can live as equals with the Israelis, subordinate to no one but your own self-determination. If you're not saying that that's what you would demand, then you're a liar. You're an absolute liar. No American would tolerate what's going on in Gaza today. No European would tolerate living under those conditions. And yet somehow we expect the Palestinian people to tolerate it, not 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 75 years, and in perpetuity. No. What happened on October 7th was not a terrorist act. It was a military operation carried out by the military arm of a people who are fed up with Israeli occupation.
Scott, grab some water. Have a drink. Oh, my friend. This is, I knew this was going to be very emotional live stream here today. We have a question that came up on the screen here. I just caught it. Most of these we can't bring up or answer most of them during the show. If you do want to send some super chats in there, that will definitely highlight some of the questions that we can bring onto the program. This one was from Kamal. Netanyahu says that Israel will control the Gaza security after the war. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, it means that Netanyahu doesn't have a plan. He doesn't know what he's doing. Let's just remember, it's to set up the answer to that question, we have to go back to October 6th. On October 6th, Benjamin Netanyahu and the rest of the collective Israeli leadership believed that Hamas was an organization dedicated to the continued governance of Gaza, but governance as dictated by Israel, the conditions of governance as dictated by Israel, meaning to control an open-air concentration camp, to be little more than the capos of the Israeli Nazi masters, capo being a term coming from the Nazi concentration camps, a Jewish prisoner who works together with the leadership of the camp to impose rules, regulations, order amongst the Jewish prisoners who are waiting to be slaughtered. So Hamas should be, in the eyes of the Israelis, their capos over their concentration camp. The Israeli military was asleep on the same night, October 6th, October 7th. The chief of staff of the Israeli army, together with the heads of the intelligence organizations, were meeting about intelligence reports that were coming in from the guys on the line saying, hey, Hamas is up to something. We've been seeing them training, where they're massing, they're moving, they've been doing rehearsals. We think they're coming over the wall. You guys might want to call an alarm, stand to. That's a Marine Corps term. I think the Army might use it, but I always fall back on my Marine Corps background. Stand to. That's what happens right before the beginning of, the morning twilight. You get all your Marines up, facing outwards, waiting for the attack, because that's when the enemy comes over. Historically, the enemy attacks at dawn. And so stand to, call in the people who are on leave. And it's the biggest religious holiday. Didn't you guys do this 50 years ago? Send everybody home on leave on Yom Kippur, only to have the Egyptians come across the Suez Canal and a surprise attack. Wow. So they're sitting there debating it, and they said, this is politically sensitive. We don't want to do that. So we'll just talk about it in the morning. Well, they did talk about it in the morning because Hamas came over the wire. And now these leaders, these same people who failed the Israeli people. They are responsible for security of the Israeli people, and they failed. Benjamin Netanyahu failed. The entire Netanyahu government failed. These are losers. These are failures. And now they're trying to pretend that somehow they're in charge. So when you're trying to pretend you're in charge, you say really stupid things. Benjamin Netanyahu's statement, talking about Gaza, implies that somehow Israel is in control. Hey, Benjamin, you haven't been in control since the morning of October 7th. Hamas has been dictating the scope, scale, pace of this operation. They lured you into a trap. I think people need to understand that. The Israeli army going into Gaza, two things about it. One, the Israelis didn't have a plan. They've done an exercise last year and this year, Chariots of Fire last year, Firm Hand this year, where they stress test the entire Israeli Defense Force in terms of what happens if everybody attacks us at once. And you say, well, Scott, so they should be prepared for this, right? No, because the big attack that they were worried about came from Hezbollah out north. That's where the bulk of the Israeli military went up with. The supporting attack was from Iran, sending missiles in, so they were ready for that. Defending the Golan Heights, they were ready for that. The West Bank and Gaza were written off as civil unrest, limited terrorist attacks. Israel has never conceived what happened on October 7th, never. And as a result, they're making the plan up. Normally, if you're a professional military organization, you have a cabinet out there where you have a plan for everything. They hired people like me, to sit there and say, write contingency plans, Ritter. What if? What do we do? And I wrote contingency plans for Iran a lot. They had no plan for this. So they're making it up as it goes along. They mobilized 300,000 guys and they go, what do we do with them? We don't know. We're going to have to launch a large-scale ground incursion. But what does that mean? Why, if you're going to launch a large-scale ground incursion, would you therefore come in and execute the mowing the grass doctrine, the Dahiwa principle? Bombing civilian population is collective punishment, a war crime, by the way, but you're dropping buildings, creating a city of rubble. Have you tried to drive a tank through a rubble-strewn street? Can't do it, guys. And we learned, from history. Ask the Germans about Stalingrad. What happened when you bombed Stalingrad into rubble and the Soviet soldiers dug in? How hard was it to pull them out? Impossible. Ask the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the Indians, the Poles about Monte Cassino in 1944, where we blew up a ancient religious site, created rubble, and the 6th German parachute division went into the rubble and held us off for months. The Israelis didn't think this thing through. So Netanyahu's saying things. We're going to be in charge of security. One, he's in charge of nothing because he hasn't secured the top. They've taken the easy corridors around, but they haven't secured the rubble. Two, what happens on top ain't where the war is being fought. The war is being fought by Hamas below ground, where they are popping up. Just last night, they destroyed 10 Israeli vehicles. 10 Israeli vehicles by popping up and attacking them with rocket-propelled grenades. 10. I don't know how many Israelis they killed, but this is going to be a death by 1,000 cuts for the Israelis. They're talking about a war that could last a year. Now, I'm not saying Hamas is going to enjoy this kind of success every night, but 365 days a year times 10, that's 3,650 some odd destroyed vehicles. Add the manpower to that, it's unsustainable losses for Israel. The other thing is, by saying you're going to occupy Gaza, the security, he's trying to come up with a solution to how you resolve the political issue of Hamas. It's one thing to say that you're going to go in and kill Hamas commanders. They're trying. They're not succeeding right now, but we're only 1 month into a war that's going to go on for many months unless rational thinking intervenes. But how do you destroy the idea? How do you destroy the idea? And so what he's saying is we're going to have to occupy. This shows you how stupid the man is, because the idea behind Hamas is born of occupation. The idea behind Hamas is legitimized by occupation. And so this idiot, Benjamin Netanyahu, says, we will control Gaza. We will occupy Gaza. Does he not understand that he's playing the Hamas game? Hamas has lured him into this trap. Hamas is winning across the board. There's not one aspect of this fight that Hamas is not winning, because everything's going according to the Hamas plan. I don't know if Hamas predicted the millions of people in the streets around the world, but that's a Hamas victory. That's a huge Hamas victory, because it's putting a horrendous amount of pressure, not on Israel, but also on the United States, Israel's #1 supporter. Right now, we have political divisions inside the White House, inside the State Department, there is open revolts, people resigning because they're saying our policy with Israel is unsupportable, unsustainable. And so we are putting pressure on Israel to do that which they say they will never do. Ceasefire. They're going to call it a pause because politically you can't call it what it really is. But a ceasefire, to implement a ceasefire, is a defeat for Israel, not because it really benefits Hamas. Hamas is ready for a 90-day war. They don't need a ceasefire. But because Israel is committed that they will never have a ceasefire, the moment they agree to a ceasefire, it's a political loss. It begins the process of Israel backing down from its hardline positions until they have to respect reality. And the reality is, you ain't going to beat Hamas.
Scott, you called it on this program 2 months ago. I went back just before I did the live stream today, and I remember you saying, I brought up a question. I think it was one of our first live streams, maybe even 3 months ago. And I asked you, the Israelis, they're using artificial intelligence. And it was you on this very program that said, watch, there's going to be a way that they get in there and they can manipulate that AI to fail. And that's exactly what has happened here. The AI failed. This is one of the most talked about military intelligence countries in the world, and they got their ass kicked. I mean, you said it on this program. I'm going to go over to a Twitter tweet that you put out, or an X, formerly known as Twitter. You sent this to Robert Kennedy Jr. You said, the tide has turned against Israel. If the trajectory stays on track, the state of Israel and the Israeli people run the risk of losing everything. Underlined, everything. Again, I mean, could this be the end of Israel?
It could be the end of political Zionism. And I would think that would be a good thing if there is a safety net. I am not advocating for the termination of the Israeli state. I am not advocating for the violent expression of from the river to the sea. A lot of people interpret that as the expulsion of the Israeli people. But if you believe in the one-state solution, from the river to the sea means that you're going to create a single state where Jews, Muslims, Christians live together as equals. That's why it's pretty difficult for the United States to articulate a single state solution. We continue to buy into a two-state solution, but a two-state solution where you have a separate Jewish state, a separate Arab state, Muslim and Christian, living side by side. That's always been the political Zionist plan, because they can manipulate that notion, as they have successfully done over the years. The Abraham Accord is the most modern manifestation of this manipulation, to create conditions, to dictate conditions of Palestinian statehood that are so unrealistic that there will never be a Palestinian state. So this is why a lot of people today are saying, we don't want a two-state solution. We're looking for a one-state solution. A one-state solution, however, cannot exist without the strategic defeat, the total defeat of political Zionism. That is the underlying philosophy that created the Israeli state to begin with. A separate Jewish homeland must be terminated, and Israel must be reimagined as a place in the Middle East where people of all faiths can live together, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. This is more difficult to do. One of the reasons why it's difficult to do is we're never allowed to think it. Because the moment you talk about this, the moment you articulate anything that is seen as being anti-Zionist Israel, you're called anti-Semitic. I mean, we see right now American politicians trying to say that if you criticize Zionism, if you speak out against Zionism, you're anti-Semitic. No, not at all. Not at all. You're just anti-fascist Israel. I mean, that's the reality. But Congress has been bought and paid for by the pro-Israeli American, the pro-Israeli lobby here in America. Don't say, Scott, you're anti-Semitic. How dare you repeat? That's blood libel. That's another term they always throw out there. That's blood libel. No, it's not. Ariel Sharon has openly bragged about buying the U.S. Congress. He was a prime minister of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu likewise openly brags about buying the U.S. Congress. Heck, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, this Jewish lobby, that pro-Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C., brags about how they control Congress. Think of it, ladies and gentlemen, at a time when Democrats and Republicans are fighting over every single issue here in the United States. Heck, today's election day, we get to see it played out live and in color. Why do, when AIPAC opens up its annual forum, why do they all flock there like subservient slaves and sit there and just effuse praise for Israel, Democrats and Republicans alike? Why? because guess who writes the campaign checks? Guess who keeps these guys who come there from being primary? That's the kiss of death in the political business, especially for a 2-year representative. You come in, you have 2 years. If you have to prepare for a primary about a year into your office, it means you're not doing a good job. You're not doing your real job. You're fighting. You're spending all your money preparing to be primary. You're not even going up against your principal opponent. You're going to lose the election. And the pro-Israeli lobby plays on this by telling them, not only will we not fund you, but we will fund your opponent in a primary. Congress is bought and paid for. The United States is controlled by Israel. There is no real criticism here in Israel of Israel today in the United States. You're not allowed to be critical, and that's the worst thing you can do to a friend. I used to be 2 feet in the Israeli camp. I mean, I think I may have told you that, but I've said that before. You know, I'm not one of these guys that have spent my whole life, you know, with a free Palestine flag. I didn't wear the keffiyeh around my neck, you know, in symbolic, you know, brotherhood with the PLO. Not my style. My style was I was in Israel from 1994 to 1998, working with Israeli intelligence in a very close fashion to resolve the issue of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. My primary function was disarmament, but the secondary function was to keep those missiles that Iraq had used during the Gulf War, which I fought in, by the way, to attack Israel. I was involved in the campaign to stop them from attacking Israel, to prevent it from happening again. And I worked at the highest levels with the Israeli intelligence service to resolve this issue. I fell in love with Israel. This is why what's happening right now just breaks my heart, because I loved Israel. I might have been naive about Israel. I mean, I have to be honest, my host was very good about opening me up to the complexities of the situation. He lived in a village. As you go from Tel Aviv up towards Jerusalem, you come up to what they call the Green Line. That's the 1967 boundary, the borders. And he lived in a village, and he, you know, on the Israeli side, and he pointed over, he said, "See that hill over there?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's on the other side of the Green Line. See that village over there with the mosque?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "That's Palestinian village." He said, "Understand that this is where we were in a barbecue, by the way, him and his neighbors were having a barbecue." He said, "This is where I raised my family. This is where you're a military guy. What does the high ground mean?" I said, "Well, mortars, snipers, observed fire." He goes, "Yeah. So if we go to war against them, we're going to die. My family's going to die. They're going to pay the price. I want peace. We want peace." This was during Yitzhak Rabin's prime minister, when he was prime minister. Yitzhak Rabin's the prime minister that's got the Oslo Accords, Oslo I, Oslo II. He was assassinated by a right-wing Jewish fanatic who was a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, assassinated because he was pursuing peace. But that's the Israel I fell in love with. I fell in love with the Israel that when a bomb went off 100 yards from my hotel and there were bodies in the streets, they went out there, they picked up the bodies, they swept off the debris, they picked themselves up, wiped off the tears, dusted themselves, and went on, not in revenge, saying we have to have peace. This is why we have to have peace. And you know who was blowing up those bombs? Hamas, a terrorist organization back then. But what did Benjamin Netanyahu do? He took Hamas, a terrorist organization, and turned it into a political organization and gave them, through elections that Israel funded and supported to divide the Palestinian population, he put them in charge of governance of Gaza. And now Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, what he's really saying is, I got to make up for the mistake I made because I, Benjamin Netanyahu, put them in charge in Gaza. I'm the one that made them govern. And let's reflect on that term governance, because you hear a lot of that from the Israelis. Hamas should be in the business of governing. Okay, I'm going to elect all of you right now, mayor of Gaza. You're the mayor of Gaza now. You're in charge of governing all these 2 million plus people. And wait a minute, you're the mayor of a city under occupation. You want your people to travel freely, but they can't. You want to have a sound economy, but you can't. The Israelis are in control of the economy. Every once in a while, they come in and bomb people. They don't let you have an airport. They don't let you have a port. They don't let you live in normal. You're in charge of governance. What would a leader of a population